Emma and Thomas. There's something unsettling about couples who seem too perfect. You know those neighbors who never argue, never raise their voice, never slam the door? Well, sometimes silence hides much more than we imagine. The story you're about to learn will shake everything you believe about relationships, commitment, and the lengths two people will go to keep a promise. Get ready, because the couple who never fought had a dark pact that would change everything. On a quiet, tree-lined street in Portland, Oregon, neighbors were always talking about Emma and Thomas Whitmore. Married for 23 years, they were the living example of marital harmony. Never a harsh word, never a dirty look, never those embarrassing arguments that make neighbors pretend they hadn't heard. This couple, who never fought, was admired by everyone in the community. Emma, 52, was a retired literature teacher, always elegant, always with a discreet smile. Thomas, 57, worked as an accountant in a downtown office, methodical and reserved, as befitted his profession. The Whitmore house was immaculate. The garden was always trimmed, the exterior paintwork was spotless, and the windows were colorful. But there was something that intrigued the residents of Maple Street. The living room curtains were never fully opened. Always that narrow gap, that sliver of light that barely allowed a glimpse inside. Sarah Jenkins, the next-door neighbor, would comment to her friends at book club, 23 years of living there, and I've never seen the inside of that room properly. The couple who never fought also never invited anyone in. It seemed strange, but who cared? After all, everyone has their quirks, their own peculiar ways of living. The dark pact between Emma and Thomas began on a cold December night years ago, when they were still newlyweds. No one knew it, of course. To the outside world, they were just an ordinary couple, perhaps a little too reserved, but certainly harmless. But on that particular night, something happened in the Whitmore house, something that forever sealed the fate of that seemingly perfect relationship. The couple who never fought had their reasons for this forced harmony, and those reasons were carefully locked away behind those eternally closed curtains. Emma and Thomas. Emma had a habit of writing everything down in a hardcover navy blue journal. Every morning before Thomas woke up, she would sit in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and write. Pages and pages of tiny, meticulous writing. No one knew the contents of those notes. The journal was locked in a drawer in their bedroom, and the key hung on a chain that Emma never removed from her neck. Thomas respected this space. In fact, Thomas respected many things in their relationship. Respect was the key word. Respect and silence. The couple who never fought had turned respect into an art, but also a prison. The years passed like leaves falling from a tree in autumn, silently, inevitably, accumulating on the ground without anyone really noticing. Emma and Thomas grew old together, side by side, but were they really together? They had a perfectly synchronized routine. Breakfast at 7 sharp. Thomas left for work at 8:15. Emma took care of the house, read her books, wrote in her diary. Dinner was always ready when Thomas returned at 6:30. They talked about trivialities, the weather, the news in the paper, some comment about the neighbors, but never, absolutely never, about that. The dark pact didn't allow it. Have you ever noticed how some couples develop a language of their own? Looks that convey entire sentences, silences that communicate more than words? Emma and Thomas had this, but in a different way. It was as if they had learned to dance a complex choreography where one wrong move could bring everything down. The couple who never fought were actually afraid. Afraid that a single misplaced word would shatter the fragile balance they had maintained for decades, and what would come next? Neither wanted to find out. Every Friday night religiously, they watched a movie together. Thomas chose the first and third week of the month, Emma the others. They sat on the couch in the living room, that mysterious room with the curtains always drawn, with popcorn and soda. Sometimes Emma rested her head on Thomas's shoulder. Sometimes he held her hand. Were these genuine gestures of tenderness or just part of the act? Hard to say. Their dark pact was so deeply rooted that perhaps even they themselves could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was an act. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends. But every pact has its cracks. Every secret carries its weight. And 23 years is enough time for even the strongest walls to begin to crack. It was on a Tuesday morning that everything began to change. Emma was in the kitchen making coffee when she noticed something different about Thomas. He was paler than usual, his eyes slightly reddened, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly as he stirred the sugar in his cup. The couple, who never fought, also rarely showed intense emotions. That trembling in his hands was a sign. Emma knew how to recognize the signs. The rehearsed harmony. Thomas looked away when he realized Emma was watching him. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but she saw it. 23 years of living together teaches you to read between the lines, to grasp what's unsaid. Emma poured the coffee in silence, placed the toast on the table, and sat in her usual chair. The couple, who never fought, even maintained their seating arrangements at the table as part of a sacred ritual. Thomas on the left, Emma on the right. The kitchen window between them, filtering the soft morning light. Everything perfectly organized, everything perfectly controlled. The day's routine continued as usual. Thomas finished his coffee, folded his napkin, and carried the cup to the sink. Emma was already on her feet, ready to wash the dishes. They moved around the kitchen like seasoned dancers, each knowing exactly where the other would be in the next second. They never bumped into each other, never got in each other's way. The dark pact they maintained had transformed their coexistence into a meticulous choreography. But choreography, no matter how perfect, can be exhausting when performed for too long. Emma watched Thomas pick up his briefcase and walk to the door. He turned, as he did every morning, and said, "See you later, Emma." Always the same words, always the same neutral tone, always that polite half-smile. She replied, as she always did, "Have a good day, Thomas." The door closed with a soft click. Emma stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sound of the car starting, the roar of the engine moving away down the street. Only then did she take a deep breath. The couple, who never fought, lived in constant contention, as if the very air around them would shatter if someone breathed too heavily. The house fell silent. Emma loved and feared this silence at the same time. He loved it because he could finally relax his shoulders, drop that erect posture he maintained whenever Thomas was around. I feared it because silence brought thoughts, and thoughts brought memories, and memories. Well, memories were dangerous. She walked to the living room, that mysterious room the neighbors speculated so much about. The heavy, dark green velvet curtains were closed as always. Emma pulled them open a tiny crack, letting in just a sliver of light. He looked out at the empty street, at the neighbors' houses, at the normal life happening outside. The dark pact kept her trapped in a glass dome, where everything seemed perfect from the outside but was suffocating inside. Sarah Jenkins was watering the flowers in the front yard. Emma watched her for a moment. Sarah was 10 years younger, had 3 noisy teenage children, and a husband who screamed while watching football games on Sundays. The Jenkins household was chaotic, full of life, full of imperfections. Emma sometimes envied it. She envied the freedom to be imperfect, to argue, to slam doors, to make peace. The couple, who never fought, had sacrificed all these normal human things for the sake of their pact. And what did they get in return? The appearance of perfection, just appearance. Emma let the curtain fall back and went to the kitchen to retrieve her navy blue diary. The key hanging around her neck jingled softly as she walked. She sat in her favorite chair, the only thing in the house that was truly hers, chosen by her without consulting Thomas. It was worn brown leather, comfortable, with a reading lamp beside it. There, in that small corner of the room, Emma could be herself. She opened the diary and began to write. The words flowed from her pen like whispered confessions, secrets that couldn't be spoken aloud. The couple who never fought held much more than they let on, and every page of that diary was proof of that. She wrote about the tremor in Thomas's hands that morning. He wrote about the fear he felt when he sensed that sign. Because signs signified change, and change threatened the delicate balance they maintained. The dark pact demanded absolute stability. Any shift could reveal what was hidden, and revealing what was hidden would mean the end of everything. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the years on her shoulders. 52 years old, 23 years married, and sometimes she wondered who she really was beneath all those layers of acting. The phone rang, startling her. Emma glanced at the ancient handset on the side table. Few people had that number. She and Thomas preferred it that way. Less contact with the outside world meant fewer awkward questions. The couple who never fought was also the couple who never overexposed themselves. Emma answered on the third ring, her voice controlled and polite as ever. "Whitmore Residence." It was the secretary from Thomas's office. He had forgotten an important document at home and was asking Emma to take it there. Something rare, very rare. Thomas never forgot anything. He was meticulous, organized, predictable. The dark pact demanded this predictability. Emma hung up the phone with a strange feeling in her stomach. She went upstairs to Thomas's office on the second floor, a room she rarely entered. The shelves were lined with accounting books, the desk was impeccably organized, and the smell of paper and varnished wood lingered. She found the brown folder on the chair. As she picked it up, some papers slipped and fell to the floor. Emma bent down to pick them up, and that was when she saw it. Among the financial documents was a photograph, old, faded, and bent at the corners. Emma picked it up with trembling fingers. The couple who never fought were about to experience their first truly tense moment in years, and Emma had no idea what that photograph would mean. The image showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with blonde hair and a radiant smile. Emma didn't recognize her immediately, but there was something familiar in those eyes, in that expression. She turned the photo over. On the back, in Thomas's elegant handwriting, was written only a name and a date. Caroline, December 1999. Emma felt her heart race. 1999. 2 years after she and Thomas had married. Who was Caroline? Why had Thomas kept that photo hidden among his work documents? Their dark pact included not asking questions about the past. But for the first time in 23 years, Emma felt an almost uncontrollable urge to break that rule. She tucked the photo into her coat pocket, grabbed her briefcase, and headed downstairs. Her heart was still pounding. The couple who never fought were about to face something they had avoided for decades, the temptation of the truth. Emma grabbed her car keys and left the house, the photograph burning in her pocket like a living, breathing secret. She drove through the familiar streets of Portland, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in speculation and fear. Who was Caroline? What role did she play in the dark pact that bound or imprisoned Emma and Thomas? The answers would come, but not in the way Emma expected. The invisible cracks. Emma parked her car in front of the office building where Thomas had worked for 15 years. A glass and concrete building, modern and impersonal, like so many others in downtown Portland. She clutched her briefcase tightly, the photo still burning in her pocket. The couple who never fought were about to have a mundane encounter, to deliver a forgotten document, but Emma sensed something had changed. The discovery of that old photo had created an invisible crack in the polished surface of their marriage, and cracks, no matter how small, tend to widen. The receptionist smiled when she saw her. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore is in his office. You can go up." Emma thanked her and walked to the elevator. Each step felt heavy, laden with meaning she couldn't fully decipher. Their dark pact included an unwritten rule: no invading each other's professional space. Thomas never showed up at Emma's book club meetings. Emma never visited his office unless absolutely necessary. That separation of worlds was essential to maintaining balance. But today, with that photo in her pocket, Emma felt like she was crossing an invisible line. Thomas's office was on the 7th floor. The door was ajar. Emma knocked lightly and entered. Thomas was sitting behind his desk, focused on his computer screen. When he looked up and saw her, a strange expression crossed his face. Surprise, apprehension. It happened so quickly that Emma couldn't be sure. "You brought the folder," he said, standing up, always polite, always formal. The couple who never fought maintained this cordiality even in their most intimate moments. Emma held out the folder, and for a moment their fingers touched. It was like an electric shock, a connection that went beyond the physical. Did Thomas know? Did he realize she had seen the photo? "Thanks for bringing it," Thomas said, opening the folder and scanning the documents. His movements were precise, but there was a tension in his shoulders that Emma knew well. She stood there, wanting to ask the question, wanting to pull the photo out of her pocket and demand an explanation. But the dark pact was stronger. The pact said, "Don't ask, don't investigate, don't break the silence." Emma felt a lump in her throat. "It was all in your chair," she said, her voice huskier than usual. Thomas nodded, not looking at her. "I'm careless sometimes," he murmured. But Thomas was never careless. That was a lie, and they both knew it. Emma left the office on shaky legs. In the elevator, alone, she leaned against the cold metal wall and took a deep breath. The couple who never fought was being tested in a new, unfamiliar way. For 23 years, they had maintained a safe distance from anything that might disturb the artificial peace they had built. But that photograph of Caroline was like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that expanded in ever-widening circles. Emma needed to know who this woman was, needed to understand her role in the Dark Pact. But how could she find out without breaking the rules? How could she investigate without destroying everything? She returned home and spent the rest of the morning restless, unable to concentrate on any task. She tried to read, but the words danced across the page without making sense. She tried to write in her journal, but her hands shook so badly that her writing was illegible. The Dark Pact had always felt like protection, a wall that kept them safe from the outside world. But now, for the first time, Emma wondered if that wall wasn't actually a prison. The couple who never fought had given up so much in the name of peace. But was it truly peace, or just the absence of conflict? That afternoon, Emma decided to do something she'd never done before. She went to the basement, where boxes of old objects, mementos from times gone by, were stored. Thomas rarely went down there. He said the musty smell bothered him. It was neutral territory, a forgotten part of the house. Emma turned on the dim light and began searching. She didn't know exactly what, but she felt she had to find something, any clue that would explain the photograph's presence. The Dark Pact included not digging into the past, but Emma could no longer contain the curiosity that consumed her. Among dusty boxes of old books and discarded household items, Emma found an antique brown leather suitcase. It was locked. She shook it gently and heard the sound of objects moving inside. Her heart raced. The couple who never fought were about to have their secrets exposed, at least to one of them. Emma searched the house until she found a hairpin and, with patience and trembling fingers, managed to force the lock. The click of the latch unlocking sounded like thunder in her ears. She opened the suitcase slowly, as if opening Pandora's box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded red string. Emma took the bundle with trembling hands and untied the knot. The first letter was in a cream-colored envelope, with no return address. She opened it and began to read. The handwriting was feminine, delicate, and full of curves. My dear Thomas. Emma felt the world spin around her. The letters were from Caroline, all of them. dated between 1999 and 2001. Love letters, passionate letters, letters that spoke of secret meetings, of whispered promises, of a future that never came to be. The couple who never fought had a secret much bigger than Emma had ever imagined. And this secret had a name, a face, a story. Emma read letter after letter, tears streaming silently down her face. Caroline spoke of Thomas with a passion Emma had never felt from him. She spoke of plans to run away together, to start a new life away from everything and everyone. But the last letter was different, shorter, colder, dated March 2001. I can't wait any longer, Thomas. You've made your choice. I hope you can live with it. Goodbye. The dark pact Emma and Thomas maintained wasn't just between the two of them. There was a third person involved, a woman Thomas had loved, perhaps loved more than he loved Emma. And this discovery hurt in a way Emma wasn't prepared to feel. She put the letters back in her suitcase, locked it, and replaced it. She climbed from the basement on shaky legs, her mind buzzing with questions. Why had Thomas chosen to stay? Why hadn't he run off with Caroline? And most importantly, what had happened to make their romance end so abruptly? The couple who never fought had built their relationship on the ruins of another love, and Emma had just found that out the hard way. She glanced at her watch. 5:30 in the afternoon. Thomas would be home in an hour. How could she look at him, sit at the dinner table, maintain a facade of normalcy, knowing what she now knew? Emma prepared dinner on autopilot. Lasagna, Thomas's favorite. Green salad, warm Italian bread, everything perfectly presented, everything perfectly normal. But inside, Emma was falling apart. The dark pact that held them together suddenly seemed fragile, built on lies and omissions. She set the plates on the table, lit the candles as she did every night, and waited. The couple who never fought were about to have the most tense dinner of their lives, even if not a word was said about the true reason for the tension. And Emma wondered, how long could she keep silent before everything exploded? The hidden signs. Thomas arrived sharp at 6:30, as always. Emma heard the key turning in the lock, the familiar sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the soft sigh he always gave as he took off his jacket. She was in the kitchen, pretending to check something in the oven, but really trying to control the tremor in her hands. The couple who never fought were about to sit across from each other for dinner, but for the first time in 23 years, Emma felt like she was sitting next to a stranger who had loved another woman, who had planned to abandon her, who had hidden an entire past beneath his facade of meticulous accountant and exemplary husband. "It smells good," Thomas said as he entered the kitchen. He leaned in, lightly kissing Emma's forehead, as he did every night, an automatic gesture without passion or warmth. Emma had always accepted it as normal, as part of Thomas's reserved personality. But now, knowing the passionate letters he had written to Caroline, that chaste kiss seemed like a lie. The dark pact they maintained included this coldness disguised as respect, this emotional distance sold as maturity. Emma served the lasagna in silence, her movements precise and controlled, but inside she screamed. They sat at the table. Thomas talked about work, something banal about a difficult client and a tight deadline. Emma made the appropriate sounds of interest, nodded at the right moments, but couldn't really listen. Her mind was on the letters, on Caroline's passionate words, on that last, cold, final letter. The couple who never fought had superficial conversations like this every night, carefully avoiding any topic that might lead to disagreements or inconvenient revelations. But Emma felt she couldn't keep up this charade much longer. The truth was becoming too big to swallow in silence. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked suddenly, interrupting his own monologue about tax rates. Emma looked up and met his eyes. There was something there, a flicker of genuine concern or maybe just caution. "I'm just tired," she lied. The Dark Pact was built on little lies like this, thousands of them accumulated over the years, forming a foundation that seemed solid, but was in fact porous and unstable. Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer, and went back to eating. The couple who never fought was also the couple who never investigated too much, who accepted superficial answers and moved on. It was safer that way. After dinner, they watched television in the living room. A documentary about World War II, Thomas's choice for the week. Emma sat on the couch, physically present but mentally distant, lost in thoughts that circled around and around, leading nowhere. Who was Caroline, really? Where was she now? Why had Thomas decided to stay with Emma instead of running away with the woman he clearly loved more intensely? Had the dark pact that bound them been born of this choice? Was the silence between them merely the echo of a love Thomas had to abandon? Emma felt like an archaeologist uncovering layers and layers of a lost civilization, each discovery revealing more questions than answers. That night, lying in bed, each on their own side as always, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling. She could hear Thomas's regular breathing, deep and steady. He slept easily, always had. Emma envied this ability. She herself rarely had a full night of peaceful sleep. At 3 a.m, when she was sure Thomas was sound asleep, Emma carefully got out of bed. The couple who never fought were also the couple who had separate nighttime routines and rarely touched each other in bed beyond a goodnight kiss on the cheek. Emma walked downstairs in the dark, each step familiar from memory after so many years. She went to her secret hiding place, a shoebox in the back of the guest room closet where she kept things she didn't want Thomas to see. There were her own old letters, photos from before her marriage, small mementos of a life that seemed to have belonged to someone else. Emma pulled out a photo of herself at 28, just before she met Thomas. She smiled radiantly, her eyes shining with hope and anticipation. Who was this woman? What had happened to her dreams, her desires, her vitality? The Dark Pact had consumed not only Thomas, but her as well. They had both become diminished versions of themselves, shadows living in a silent house. Emma spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance. She watched Thomas constantly, searching for signs, for clues, for anything that might better explain Caroline's mystery. She noticed small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way Thomas would sometimes stand and stare out the window, lost in thought, the way he gripped the phone tighter when it rang, as if expecting or dreading a specific call. The nights he would wake in the middle of the night and sit on the stairs, just staring into space. The couple who never fought were surrounded by silences, but Emma was beginning to realize that not all silences were created equal. Some were empty, others filled with things unsaid. On Thursday of that week, Emma made a decision. She needed to know more about Caroline. She needed to understand who this woman was and what role she had played in the formation of the Dark Pact. Emma waited for Thomas to leave for work and then called her friend Dorothy, who worked at the public library. Dorothy was a natural researcher, loving to delve into old archives and unravel mysteries. "I need a favor," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need you to help me find information about someone." The couple who never fought was about to have one of their members break the rules, and Emma knew there would be no going back from this. Dorothy agreed to help without asking too many questions. She was a good friend like that, discreet and trustworthy. They arranged to meet at the library the following afternoon. Emma spent the rest of the day nervously reviewing what she knew about Caroline. Just a name, a few dates, passionate letters, and a faded photo. It wasn't much, but Dorothy was good at what she did. If there was something to find, she would find it. Emma and Thomas's Dark Pact was based on not touching the past, but Emma could no longer live without knowing. Ignorance, which had once seemed bliss, was now torture. On Friday afternoon, Emma parked in front of Portland's Central Library. It was an imposing old stone building steeped in history. She walked in and found Dorothy waiting at a table in the back, surrounded by books and papers. "I found something," Dorothy said as soon as Emma sat down. There was excitement in her voice, but also something else, a note of concern. Emma felt her heart race. The couple who never fought was about to have their past exposed, or at least part of it. Dorothy pushed some documents across the table. "Caroline Mitchell. That's what you asked me to look for, right?" Emma nodded, unable to speak, and picked up the first document with trembling hands. It was a newspaper article dated April 2001. "Woman disappears under mysterious circumstances," Emma read quickly. Caroline Mitchell, 26, had been reported missing by her family in March 2001, last seen leaving her Portland apartment. Police investigated but never found any solid leads. The case was closed as a voluntary disappearance after a year without any new developments. Emma felt her blood run cold. The dark pact she and Thomas had maintained suddenly took on much more sinister overtones. Caroline hadn't simply left. Caroline had disappeared, and her last letter to Thomas was from March 2001, exactly when she vanished. The buried truth. Emma stood frozen, staring at the newspaper article. The words seemed to float on the page, disconnected from reality. Caroline Mitchell, missing, March 2001. The same dates as the letters Emma had found in the basement. The couple who never fought had a secret much darker than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a hidden flame, a past romance Thomas preferred not to mention. It was something potentially terrible, something that made Emma questioned everything she thought she knew about the man she had shared her bed with for 23 years. "Emma, are you okay?" Dorothy's voice brought her back. Emma blinked, trying to focus. "I'm sorry, this is a lot to process." Dorothy placed her hand over hers in comfort. "Do you want to tell me why you're looking for information about this woman?" Emma shook her head. She couldn't. The dark pact included not involving others, not exposing her and Thomas's private lives to outside scrutiny. It was one of the fundamental pillars of their silent agreement. Even now, faced with a possible tragedy, Emma felt the pressure of that pact, like invisible chains binding her tongue. Dorothy didn't press the issue. She pushed more documents across the table. "I found other things, too. Follow-up reports, some mentions on online cold case forums. Caroline's family never gave up searching for her. Mother is still alive, lives in Seattle now. She has a website dedicated to finding her daughter." Emma felt a lump in her throat. A mother still searching, still hoping after more than 20 years. Meanwhile, Emma lived her quiet life in a quiet house, married to a man who might... No, she couldn't think about that. The couple who never fought couldn't be involved in something so horrible. There had to be another explanation. Emma took the papers and thanked Dorothy. She said it was just curiosity, a story she'd heard mentioned somewhere that had piqued her interest. Dorothy didn't seem convinced, but she respected Emma's silence. They said goodbye, and Emma left the library as if floating, disconnected from reality. The world around her seemed too bright, too noisy. She got into the car and sat there for long minutes trying to gather her thoughts. The dark pact she and Thomas maintained. Had it been born from this? Was the silence between them a form of mutual protection against something unspeakable? Emma drove aimlessly, the streets of Portland passing by in a blur. Her mind worked frantically, connecting dots, creating theories, discarding them, creating new ones. Thomas and Caroline had been in a relationship. Caroline disappeared in March 2001. Her last letter was cold, final, as if she were closing something. But what if it wasn't just the end of a relationship? What if it was the end of something more? Emma shook her head, trying to push away horrible thoughts. The couple who never fought were ordinary people, not... No, she couldn't even complete the thought. But there was something else bothering her. Emma tried to remember March 2001. They had been married for only 3 years at the time. They were still in the process of building a life together, establishing routines. Emma remembered Thomas becoming different during that period, quieter, more distant, more scared. Yes, scared was the word. He slept poorly, woke up in the middle of the night sweating, said they were nightmares, but never said what they were about. At the time, Emma had attributed it to work stress. Thomas was trying for a promotion at the accounting firm. But now, knowing what she knew, that period took on a completely different meaning. Had the dark pact begun there? Emma parked in a park she used to frequent before her wedding. She got out of the car and walked to a bench under a large tree. She needed to think, needed to process all of this away from home, away from Thomas, away from the walls that held so many secrets. The couple who never fought had become the couple who perhaps had never truly known each other. Emma looked at her hands, noticing for the first time how old they seemed, marked by time. 52 years, more than half a lifetime lived, and how many of those years were real, how many were just an elaborate performance. A terrible thought began to form in Emma's mind. What if she had known? What if deep down, on some subconscious level, she had always suspected something was wrong? What if the dark pact wasn't just Thomas's but hers as well? What if she had chosen not to ask questions, not to investigate, not to break the silence, because deep down she was afraid of what she might discover? Perhaps the couple who never fought had built their relationship on mutual denial, both choosing the illusion of peace over the disturbing truth. Emma returned home late that afternoon, emotionally exhausted. Thomas hadn't arrived yet. She went straight upstairs to her room and lay down, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. The house was too quiet, too heavy. Every room seemed to hold secrets. Every corner concealed something unsaid. The dark pact they maintained had transformed the house into a mausoleum for dead truths. Emma closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to cry. She cried for the young woman she had been, full of hope. She cried for Caroline, a woman she had never met, but who was somehow entwined in her life. She cried for the marriage she thought she had and the reality she was beginning to see. By the time Thomas got home, Emma had composed herself. She washed her face, changed her clothes, and went downstairs to make dinner as if it were a normal day. But something had irrevocably changed inside her. The couple who never fought was about to enter unfamiliar territory, because Emma couldn't keep quiet much longer. She needed to know the truth. She needed to look Thomas in the eye and ask the question burning in her throat, what happened to Caroline? But not tonight. Not yet. Emma needed more information, more courage, more certainty that she was ready to hear the answer. They ate dinner in near silence. Thomas seemed worried, stealing glances at Emma. He knew something was different, she was certain of it. The dark pact worked because they were both extremely attuned to each other, able to read between the lines, to sense subtle shifts in energy. Thomas could sense Emma's change, just as Emma had sensed his trembling hands days ago. They were in a delicate dance, each waiting for the other to make the first move. The couple who never fought were on the verge of a confrontation that had been postponed for 2 decades. Later, when they were lying in bed, Thomas broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse in the darkness, "we need to talk." Emma felt her heart race. Was this the moment? Would Thomas finally break the dark pact and tell her the truth? She turned to face him, barely able to make out his features in the dim light of the room. "About what?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. There was a long pause. Emma could hear Thomas's heavy breathing, feel the tension emanating from him in waves. The couple who never fought was seconds away from a revelation that would change everything. And then Thomas said something Emma hadn't expected. "The collapse. I'm sick, Emma." The words hung in the dark air of the room. Emma blinked, confused, trying to process what she had just heard. This wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a confession about Caroline. It wasn't a revelation about their dark past. It was something completely different but equally devastating. The couple who never fought were about to face a crisis no dark pact could prevent or control. Mortality. What? Emma managed, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas sat up in bed and turned on the lamp. The soft light revealed his pale face, his tired eyes, the expression of someone carrying an unbearable weight. I went to the doctor last week. Tests I'd been putting off for months. The results came back yesterday. He paused, swallowed hard. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. Emma felt the world crumble around her. The dark pact, Caroline's letters, the mysterious disappearance, all of it suddenly seemed distant, irrelevant in the face of this brutal news. "How long?" Emma asked, her mind suddenly practical, clinical, as if it were the only way to deal with the information. Thomas looked down at his hands. 6 months, maybe a year if the chemotherapy works. But the doctors aren't optimistic. The couple who never fought fell silent, processing. 23 years together, and suddenly the end was marked on the calendar, like an inevitable appointment. Should Emma throw herself into his arms? Cry? Scream? But she couldn't. Something kept her paralyzed, torn between compassion for her dying husband and anger at the man who had hidden so many secrets. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Emma asked. Thomas sighed, a sound filled with weariness. "Because I needed to process it myself first. Because I didn't know how to say it. Because," he hesitated, "because our relationship has always been like this. We keep things to ourselves." There it was, admitted out loud for the first time. The dark pact that held them together was also what kept them apart. Thomas's illness was just another secret in a growing pile of unspoken truths. Emma felt tears roll down her face, but she couldn't tell if she was crying for Thomas, for herself, or for the marriage that had never been what it seemed. Thomas reached out, touching Emma's face for the first time in years, in a way that felt genuine, vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he said. And there was so much weight in those 2 words that Emma felt something break inside her. The couple who never fought were finally enjoying a moment of true intimacy, but it had taken the close call of death to tear down the walls they had built. Emma took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "We'll get through this together," she heard her own voice say, as if coming from far away. But even as she spoke the words of support, a part of her mind was still trapped in Caroline's letters, in her unexplained disappearance, in the secrets that seemed to pulse in the walls of that house. The following days were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, specialist opinions, and discussions about treatments and prognoses. Thomas decided against chemotherapy. "I want to enjoy the time I have left with quality, not spend my last months nauseous and weak," he explained. Emma respected his decision, though part of her wanted to beg him to fight, to try anything. The dark pact now included a new dimension, the certainty of an imminent end. And with that certainty came an urgency Emma had never felt before. If Thomas was going to die, she needed to know the truth before it was too late. The couple who had never fought would finally have to have difficult conversations, but Thomas seemed determined to remain silent about the past, even in the face of death. He talked about his illness, practical arrangements, finances, and his will. But whenever Emma tried to steer the conversation toward deeper, more personal topics, Thomas deftly deflected. It was as if, even knowing the end was near, he still clung to the pact that had defined them for so long. Emma wavered between frustration and compassion. How could she press a dying man for answers? How could she demand truths from someone who would soon be gone? The couple who never fought were caught in a moral dilemma with no easy solution. A week after the diagnosis, Emma made a decision. She would confront him about Caroline. She couldn't let Thomas die without knowing the truth, without understanding what had really happened. without understanding the foundation on which they had built their marriage. She waited until Saturday night, after dinner, when they were sitting in the living room. The heavy curtains were still drawn, the soft light from the lamp casting shadows in the corners. Emma took a deep breath and said, "Thomas, I need to ask you about Caroline Mitchell." The effect was instantaneous. Thomas paled even more, if that were possible. His hands began to shake. The couple who never fought were about to have their first real confrontation. "How did you—" Thomas began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Emma took the photograph from her pocket, the one she'd found in his office. She placed it on the coffee table between them. "I found this, and I found the letters in the basement, and I discovered she disappeared in March 2001. Emma kept her voice steady, controlled, but inside she was trembling. Thomas stared at the photo as if it were a ghostly apparition. He was silent for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. The dark pact was being challenged in a way it never had been before. And then, finally, Thomas began to speak. "I loved her," he said, his voice husky, thick with emotion. "I loved her in a way I've never loved anyone, before or since." The words were like knives to Emma's heart, but she forced herself to listen. "We met in 1998 at an accounting conference. She was an assistant to one of the speakers. It was overwhelming, immediate, like we'd known each other forever. The couple who never fought were finally having their truth exposed, and it was as painful as Emma had imagined." Thomas continued, the words coming out in a rush, as if a dam had broken after years of holding back the waters. "We started seeing each other in secret. I'd only been married to you for a year. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. Caroline wanted me to divorce you, to start a life together. I promised I would. I promised so many times." Thomas closed his eyes, as if the memory were too physical to bear. "But I was afraid of hurting you, afraid of what my family would say, afraid of starting over. I was a coward." The dark pact between Emma and Thomas, she now realized, had begun there, in his cowardice, in his betrayal, in his love for another woman. And Emma had been merely the safe option, the comfortable choice, the woman he'd stayed with because he lacked the courage to leave. "In March 2001, Caroline gave me an ultimatum," Thomas continued, his eyes still closed. "She said she couldn't wait any longer. Either I left the house that week, or she would move on without me. I arranged to meet her on a Saturday night to give her my final answer." But he paused for a long, painful moment. Emma could barely breathe, waiting for the rest of the story. The couple who never fought were on the precipice of the most important revelation of their lives. And then Thomas opened his eyes, looked directly at Emma, and said the words that would change everything. "I didn't go to the meeting. I decided to stay with you. But Caroline never forgave me for that. She disappeared because she wanted to disappear, to punish me, to make me suffer. The impossible truth." Emma looked at Thomas, trying to process what she had just heard. Part of her wanted to believe that version, wanted to accept that Caroline had simply disappeared of her own free will to punish the man who had rejected her. But something didn't add up. There were missing pieces to the puzzle, gaps too big to ignore. The couple who never fought were having their first truly honest conversation, but was it really the whole truth? Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew Thomas well enough to know when he was leaving something out, and he was leaving something out now. "Thomas," Emma said, her voice surprisingly steady, "if Caroline disappeared of her own free will, why did you keep her letters all these years? Why did you hide the photo? Why did you never mention any of this in 23 years of marriage?" Thomas looked away, his hands shaking visibly now. The dark pact that had held them together was shattering like glass, shard by shard, and beneath the shards was something Thomas clearly didn't want Emma to see. "I kept it because—" He hesitated. "Because I felt guilty, because I destroyed a woman's life with my indecision." But Emma was no longer satisfied with half-truths. The proximity of Thomas's death, rather than softening her resolve, had intensified it. If he was going to leave, she deserved to know everything. "Where were you that night, Thomas? The night Caroline disappeared. You said you didn't go to the meeting, but where were you?" The couple who never fought were now being interrogated, Emma taking on a role she had never played before. Thomas was silent for so long that Emma thought he simply wouldn't answer, and then, to her surprise, he began to cry. Silent tears streamed down his pale face, his shoulders shaking. "I went," Thomas whispered, so softly Emma almost didn't hear. "I went to the meeting." Emma's world stopped spinning. Everything he'd just said was a lie. He'd gone to meet Caroline. "I met her at a secluded spot near the Columbia River, a place where we used to meet. I arrived there determined to end it all, to tell her I couldn't leave you, that I couldn't destroy our marriage." Thomas wiped the tears away with the back of his hand, but they kept coming. The dark pact was being destroyed word by word, and Emma didn't know if she was prepared for what came next. The couple who never fought was about to have their darkest truth revealed. Caroline was furious when I told her that. More than furious, she was distraught. She started screaming, hitting me, telling me I'd ruined 3 years of her life, that she'd turned down other men because of me, that she'd never forgive me. Thomas took a deep, shaking breath. And then she said something that changed everything. She said she was pregnant. Emma felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Pregnant. Caroline was pregnant with Thomas. The dark pact had even deeper, more twisted roots than she'd ever imagined. She said she had 3 months, that the baby was mine, that I couldn't just leave now. Emma rose from the sofa, unable to sit still. She began pacing the living room, trying to process this bombshell revelation. Thomas had a son, or would have had, Caroline not disappeared. A son he never mentioned, a pregnancy he had hidden throughout their marriage. The never-fighting couple had built their relationship on lies so big that Emma could barely comprehend their magnitude. "Continue," she ordered, her voice cold now, all traces of compassion for his illness temporarily forgotten in the face of the monumental betrayal being revealed. "I panicked," Thomas continued, his voice cracking. "I didn't know whether to believe her, whether it was manipulation or the truth. We argued more, yelled at each other. And then Caroline said she was going to tell you everything. She was going to show up at our house, tell me about the affair, about the pregnancy, destroy our marriage publicly if I didn't stay with her." The dark pact, Emma now understood, had been born that night, born of fear, of panic, of the desperate need to keep up appearances. Thomas had chosen to stay with her, not out of love, but out of convenience, out of cowardice, out of terror that the truth would come out. She got in her car and sped off. She was crying, driving too fast. I just stood there, not knowing what to do. Thomas covered his face with his hands. The next day, I saw on the news that a woman had gone missing, Caroline Mitchell. They found her car abandoned near a bridge over the river. There was no sign of her. The police assumed she had jumped, that it was suicide, but they never found her body. Emma felt her legs weaken. She sat down again, gasping for breath. The couple who never fought had lived 23 years with this shadow hanging over them, or at least Thomas had. Emma had been just an unwitting bystander to a tragedy she hadn't even known existed. "Do you think she killed herself?" Emma asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Thomas shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I never knew. Sometimes I think she did, that I pushed her into it with my rejection. Other times, I think she just ran away, started a new life far from here, far from me. Or maybe—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The dark pact they kept included not talking about Caroline, not investigating, not asking questions. Because asking questions could lead to answers neither of them wanted to hear. Emma now understood why Thomas had never told the police he'd seen her that night. He was afraid of becoming a suspect, afraid they'd investigate and discover the affair, the pregnancy, the motives. "Why did you stay with me, Thomas?" Emma asked, her voice breaking for the first time. "If you loved her so much, if she was pregnant with your child, why did you stay?" Thomas finally looked at her, and what Emma saw in his eyes was a mixture of guilt, shame, and something that might have been remorse. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of the police, afraid of scandal, afraid they would discover my involvement with her. Staying with you was the safest thing to do. You were my perfect alibi. A married man, stable, predictable. No one would suspect me." The couple who never fought, Emma realized with growing horror, had been a sham from the start. She wasn't the beloved wife. She was the convenient cover. Emma felt nausea rising in her throat. She got up and ran to the bathroom, where she vomited up everything she had eaten for dinner. 23 years. 23 years living a lie, being used as an alibi, as a facade of normalcy for a man who might be responsible for the disappearance of a pregnant woman. The dark pact she thought was about mutual respect and peace was actually about concealing a potential crime. Emma washed her face, looked at her reflection in the mirror. Who was that woman staring back? She barely recognized herself. The couple who never fought was now completely destroyed. The wreckage of their relationship scattered around them like wreckage from an accident. When Emma returned to the living room, Thomas was exactly where she'd left him, hunched over, looking as if he'd aged 10 years in minutes. "There's more," he said, and Emma thought she couldn't bear any more revelations. But Thomas continued, relentless. 2 weeks after Caroline disappeared, I received a letter. No return address posted from Vancouver. It was from her. Emma sat up slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. What did it say? Thomas went to his office and returned with a yellowed envelope. He handed it to Emma with trembling hands. The couple who never fought was about to have their final twist, the C point no one saw coming, and this letter would change absolutely everything Emma thought she knew. Emma opened the envelope with trembling fingers and began to read. Caroline's handwriting was firm, controlled, a far cry from the passionate letters Emma had read in the basement. Thomas, this will be the last you hear from me. I'm not dead, though you probably thought so when you saw the news. I left my car on the bridge on purpose, so everyone would think I'd committed suicide, but I wasn't pregnant, Thomas. I never was. It was a desperate lie to make you stay with me. And when you still didn't, I realized what kind of man you really were. A coward. I'm leaving, starting a new life where no one knows me, and you'll live the rest of your life wondering what happened to me, carrying this guilt. It's the least you deserve. Emma finished reading and looked at Thomas, stunned. Caroline was alive, or at least she was when she wrote that letter. The couple who never fought had lived for 23 years under the shadow of a disappearance that was, in fact, an elaborate revenge. The weight of silence. Emma held Caroline's letter between her fingers, rereading the words over and over, as if hoping they would change meaning. Caroline was alive, or at least she was in 2001, when she wrote that cruel and final farewell. 23 years of a dark pact built on a farce within a farce. Thomas had carried the guilt for the disappearance of a woman who deliberately staged her own death to punish him. And Emma had been the ignorant wife, the convenient pawn in a chessboard played by others. The couple who never fought finally had all the cards on the table, and what they saw was devastating. "Why didn't you ever show me that letter?" Emma asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Thomas shrugged, looking smaller, more fragile. "Because I would have had to explain everything else. It was easier to keep quiet, to move on, to pretend nothing had happened. The dark pact wasn't about respect or harmony, it was about convenience and cowardice. It was about two strangers living under the same roof, each in their own prison of silence, never truly connecting." Emma walked to the window and drew back the heavy curtains for the first time in years. Streetlight streamed in, illuminating the room that had been perpetually dim. The couple who never fought had sacrificed authenticity for the sake of an artificial peace. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked, his voice small. Emma turned to face him. "I don't know. You're dying. But I also made choices. I chose not to ask questions. I chose to accept silence. The couple who never fought was created by the two of us. The following months were strange, uncomfortable, but also strangely liberating." Emma and Thomas began to have real conversations for the first time. Conversations about abandoned dreams, regrets, fears. The dark pact had imprisoned them both, but now they were opening the doors. Not everything was reconciliation. There were days when Emma felt pure rage for what he had done. But there were also unexpected moments of tenderness, of genuine connection they had never experienced before. The couple who had never fought now fought sometimes, but they also laughed. It was imperfect, chaotic, painful, but it was real. Thomas died on a quiet Tuesday morning, with Emma beside him. His last words were, "Caroline, I'm sorry." The dark pact died with Thomas that morning, and Emma felt simultaneously free and lost. The funeral was small, low-key. Afterward, when everyone had left, Emma stood alone in the cemetery. The couple who never fought was over. But Emma's story was just beginning. At 52, she had a second chance to live authentically. Emma returned home and began making changes. He repainted the walls vibrant colors. He transformed Thomas's office into a writing space, where he finally began the book he'd dreamed of writing, a book about silences, about unspoken pacts. The couple who never fought became the working title, a way to transform pain into art, secrets into stories. 6 months later, Emma received a letter, no return address, postmarked from Seattle. Her heart sank when she recognized the handwriting. "Dear Emma," the letter began, "my name is Caroline Mitchell. I saw Thomas's obituary online. I felt you deserved to know the full truth." Caroline told her side of the story, about how she had really run away, about how she had built a new life. "I write because I want you to know that I hold no grudges. You knew nothing. You were as much a victim as I was. We all made choices. If you want to talk, my number is below." Emma tucked the letter away in her diary, along with her old love letters. The dark pact had finally revealed all its secrets. Today, a year later, Emma is at peace, finishing her book, cultivating real friendships, exploring who she is without the chains of the dark pact. She's joined a hiking group and is considering adopting a dog. The house on Maple Street is no longer a mausoleum of secrets, but a home where Emma is learning to live authentically. The couple who never fought has become a woman who has finally found her voice. Emma and Thomas's story is a powerful reminder. Silence is not peace. Avoiding conflict is not harmony. Marriages built on the unsaid are sandcastles waiting for the first wave. The dark pact seemed to work for 23 years, but it was only postponing the inevitable. And when it collapsed, it left rubble. But in the rubble, Emma found something valuable. Herself. The couple who never fought taught Emma a lesson. It's better to live one day in uncomfortable truth than a lifetime in comfortable lies. So I ask you, how many dark pacts do you keep in your own life? How many truths do you avoid in the name of superficial peace? The answers may be uncomfortable, but they are essential. Life is too short to be lived in silence. Too short for relationships based on what's unsaid. The couple who never fought lost precious decades, but you don't have to. You can choose right now to live with more truth, more courage, more authenticity. It won't be easy, but it will be real, and real is all that matters. Leave a comment. Have you ever experienced or know someone who has experienced a dark pact in a relationship? How do you deal with difficult truths in your relationships? Share your experience. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles is the first step toward healing. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. And remember, the truth may hurt, but lies destroy. Always choose the truth, even when it's difficult. See you in the next video.